electronic devices. In addition, this meeting is going to be both audio and video recording. You could watch it live on Comcast, Verizon, as well as the school board YouTube channel. You also can find a recording of it later on the school board's YouTube channel, Facebook, as well as the division's website. Ms. Williams, may I please have a roll call, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Rachel Kirkland,
Here.
Ms. Tricia Rhodes,
Here.
Ms. Debbie McIntyre.
Here.
Madam Chair, Mr. Paul Alexander will not be attending, and at this time, we're still waiting to hear from Mr. Carlos.
All right, thank you so much. And do I have any additions or corrections to the agenda? Seeing that there are no additions or corrections to the agenda, can I get a motion regarding the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Hearing no opposition, the motion to approve the agenda hereby passes. Now going ahead and moving on to ongoing business. The first item is superintendent application interviews. The Manassas Park School Board will be conducting interviews for the position of superintendent from March 10th, 2021 through March 25th, 2021. These interviews will be held in accordance with the Virginia Code, Section 2.23712. Now going ahead and moving on to FY21 revised budget public hearing. Mr. Warwick, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, and Madam Chair and members of the board. I'm going to share my screen, so if you could just bear with me for a second. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great, great. Wonderful. Okay, tonight we're asking for the school board's approval to advertise the amendment of the FY21 budget. As required by Virginia Code 15.2-2507, the school board must hold a public hearing if the total expenditures exceed 1% of the currently adopted budget. Also, the Virginia Code requires the publication of a notice of public hearing at least 7 days prior to the meeting date. Finally, the school board will have the opportunity to adopt the amended budget right after the public hearing is held. Why will the budget exceed the 1% requirement? It is primarily due to the federal CARES Act funding the division has been awarded during fiscal year 2021. The total amount awarded of $1.17 million was awarded under 3 different categories when provided by the state. Coronavirus relief funds of $597,000 were originally provided with a short time frame to spend, 2 months, had now been extended by the federal government for another year through December 31, 2021. ESSER 1 funds of $273,000 were provided as a 2-year grant with an end date of September 30th, 2022. Spending has been delayed due to the short time frame focus of the CRF funds mentioned previously. Lastly, state set-aside funds of $303,000 have a similar grant period to ESSER 1 funds. However, the award was based on specific budget categories of spending. We also added an additional item that was approved by Manassas Park City for the reimbursement of the middle school cooling tower replacement of $142,000. Since the city included this as part of their revised budget, it was important for the division to include it here as well. This slide presents a table reflecting the actual changes being proposed for the revised FY21 budget. As can be seen in the lower right-hand corner, the increases are 2.83% of the total budget, requiring the public hearing. In closing, we present this rationale sheet tonight requesting school board approval of a budget increase of $1,314,810 to advertise on March 5th for a public hearing on March 15th, to then have discussion and school board approval of the FY21 revised budget. Thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes my presentation.
Does anybody have any questions regarding the revision to the budget?
I do. So, Mr. Warwick, you said that for the funding that we have until the end of the calendar year to spend. So what happens if those funds are not spent in this fiscal year? Do they carry over into the next fiscal year?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So the funds have been awarded to us, but the way that the federal grants work is that they're on a reimbursement basis.
Okay.
So we only request the funds as we spend them. So if we spend funds, the only one that was the exception to that was the CRF grant. They had provided those funds in advance because I believe it was because we had such a short time frame to spend that they wanted us to have the funds available to be able to make all those purchases in such a short time. But typically they're on a reimbursement basis, and CRF has already been fully expended. So the only two left at this point are the ESSER 1 funds and the state set aside. We also do have a brand new federal grant that's under CARES that I think I mentioned in one of my previous the work groups, is for $1.1 million, and that's called the ESSER 2 grant. And that one we can't start spending until ESSER 1 has been fully expended.
Thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Does anybody else have any questions? Seeing that there are no further questions, do I have a motion regarding the budget amendment?
I move to approve the FY21 revised budget public hearing announcement.
I second that.
Oh, gosh. Second.
All right. Now that this is a financial matter, Ms. Williams, can I have a roll call?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Rachel Kirkland,
Yes.
Ms. Tricia Rhodes,
Yes.
Mr. Carlos Vargas,
Yes.
Ms. Debbie McIntyre.
Yes. Hearing that there is no opposition, the motion to advertise for a public hearing on March 5th and have a public hearing on March 15th and a potential approval of the amended budget on March 15th hereby passes. Now going ahead and moving on to the FY22 superintendent's proposed budget. Mr. Warwick again.
Thank you again, Madam Chair and members of the board. I will attempt to share my screen again. The superintendent's proposed budget for all funds is currently set at $49,451,675 with the following components. The general fund at $45,328,969. The federal fund at $1,865,178. The medical trust fund at $181,788, and the food service fund of $2,075,740. Some changes to the FY22 budget include a decrease in the medical rate estimate. Although the division budgeted 10% for medical rate increases, the rates have come in much lower at an average increase of 3.7%. This has resulted in a cost savings of $136,000. The division is suggesting to add the following into the superintendent's proposed budget to offset this cost savings. Project Up/Intercessions or summer learning of $38,000, a very important program for the summertime as well as during the year. Current state grant funding for this program will end in FY21. The INET agreement with the City of Manassas Park. This has to do with the use of the Comcast fiber infrastructure throughout the city that provides the connections to our buildings, which previously was provided for free. Comcast will begin charging the city for this starting January 1, 2022, and the city will pass the school share on to us. The cost ranges from $60,000 to $96,000 annually. Now a review of our three major budget priorities are as follows. The highest priority is the compensation adjustment. Each percentage point increase in the midpoint is approximately $400,000 in cost. At 3%, which is what the current proposal is set at, the total requested amount is $1.13 million. We also, our second highest priority item are the learning support positions. We have three different categories for these positions. The 4 compliance positions are positions that we really do have to fill for compliance reasons, such as SOQ or other compliance requirements. The total of those dollars are $304,000. We also have 5 CARES eligible positions. Those total, with salaries and benefits, $296,000. And the other general fund positions, there are 8 of them, total $536,000 in salaries and benefits, for a total of $1.14 million. And lastly, the roof replacement at the high school is our third highest priority item, and that's at $1.2 million. We are in partnering discussions with the City of Manassas Park for this roof replacement, and so those discussions will continue. On this slide, we have listed the new positions being requested with dollar amounts in 3 categories: compliance related, CARES eligible, and other needs of the division. Although all of these positions are needed in the division, these positions have carefully been listed in priority order. We have under compliance related, the school counselor as our first priority, then the early childhood SPED teacher, the adaptive SPED teacher, and the adaptive instructional aid. Under the ESSER grant, ESSER 2 grant, which will be in next fiscal year, the school counselor, the math specialist teacher, the math intervention IA, the attendance officer, and the facilities technician. And then in the other needs category, we have the pre-K program specialist as our highest priority, then the math teacher and the science teacher, both under Cougar Connect at the high school, the ESOL teacher at Cougar, the EL specialist at the division level, 2 bus drivers, and the testing coordinator. The Senate and House proposals were finalized, and these are the results of their bills. The House Bill 1800, is proposing state funding that would actually add funding of approximately $10,000 to what we currently have budgeted. The Senate Bill 1100 is also proposing for additional funding of almost $587,000. We anticipate the final bill will fall somewhere in between. So what will the budget impact be with these bills that haven't been passed yet? The city transfer ask currently is $3.347 million. With the House bill budget, the impact would reduce the ask to $2.537 million, while the Senate bill would reduce the ask to $2.76 million. So our next steps are on March 15th, the school board will adopt the budget. And then on March 23rd, the school board makes their presentation to the city. Thank you, Madam Chair. This concludes my presentation on the FY22 budget discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Warwick. Do you have any indication of when either the House or Senate budget will be adopted so that we know specifically what that figure may be? Because you had indicated it would probably be something in between, but do we know when that final decision is going to be made?
So I know that they're planning on having a meeting today, actually, and they may have something adopted, by the end of this week. I'm not 100% clear at this point, but I can certainly look into it and let you know.
I appreciate that. Yes. So as soon as you know what the specific figure is, if you could just provide us an update, I'd really appreciate it. And then if it is possible, if you can email us your slides so that we could have those for us to review. I was taking notes and I figured, you know what, it might just be easier to ask for the actual slides. So if you can send that out to all of us, I'd really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions?
I have another question as it relates to, there was some discussion from the governor's standpoint about funding. There was an additional revenues of $700 million that the state is seeing, and that potentially was going to come to the school system and to the city, frankly, for raises. Are you hearing anything from that perspective? Of course, it was in the newspaper that I saw the notification, but is there any discussions that you're hearing about that? Or is that included in the Senate and the House bills?
Well, those are good questions. So I do know that they are all seeming to agree on that there will be a 5% increase, but that's on a biennium basis.
Yeah.
So that, obviously it covers FY21 and FY22. So I think we're, in line or a little bit above that with the 3% that we're currently proposing. However, we've already obviously paid out the raises this year. So I think if anything, we'd be able to recoup some funds, from those dollars for what we've already paid out. But I don't know that there's anything final that I've heard about in regards to the 700,000 as far as how much of that piece of the pie we would be getting.
Okay. The other question that I had is, you mentioned that you were working with the city on the roof replacement. Are they indicating, I know that there was discussion of whether or not we could do a joint RFP. There was some other additional work that needed to be done. What does what's the sense of this $1 million or $1.2 million for the roof replacement as a part of the budgeting cycle for next year. Have they indicated to you what they're thinking?
I'm going to actually hand that over to Eric and Mr. Neff because he's been more involved in those details.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Good question. Thanks, Lou. I did meet, Mr. Simpson and I met with Kenny and Calvin from the city last week. And we shared the information that we received from Blake Giddens regarding the high school roof. I know the city reached out to Blake and have scheduled a meeting, I believe, for sometime this week. I saw an email this morning back and forth that they were going to meet at the police station to take a look at the police station roof. The conversation with Calvin and Kenny was quite positive. Of course, there wasn't any dollar figure shared with me at that time, but I felt really confident that it's a project that the city is very interested in working closely with us to have both roofs done at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. Neff.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Obviously, 4 of those positions are required for compliance, so we have no choice but to obviously include those in the budget. There was another category for positions that would be potentially covered through CARES funding, and then another category that were extra positions. In terms of the positions for the CARES funding, would they be 100% funded through those monies, or would there be a certain amount that we would also need to come up with through the general fund to fund those positions?
No, there is no matching requirement for those federal grants. So yeah, that would be able to be funded fully by the federal grant and potentially for 2 years. I mean, depending on what our, decisions were in how to spend the rest of those dollars, we could possibly fund them for a second year.
Okay, and then on the first slide that you had presented was obviously the part about the internet is something that we have no choice. It's going to have to be added into the budget. Regarding the project up, was that something that we had already accounted for in terms of our summer programming for this upcoming year? Specifically, I know that a lot of the funding through CARES and all of that would potentially be able to provide for that money. So I didn't know if that was something we'd be able to allocate some of those funds to instead of adding an additional 38 to the budget, I should say, really supplanting this for the savings we're receiving for the health insurance.
Yeah, so that's the one thing with the federal funding that's a difficult thing to do, because once you've spent those types of dollars in your budget previously, the federal government doesn't really like you to then use those budget dollars in their programs. So yeah, that wouldn't be something that I would recommend doing.
Okay, yeah, no, I definitely understand you because yeah, there's certain caveats that you can't use the money for stuff that you've had previously budgeted. And I know we've had Project Up in many years past budget, so definitely makes a lot of sense. And the only other thing that I would ask is that if Mr. Neff, if you can update us regarding and keep us in the loop regarding the roof conversations, because clearly one of the main components that we're going to have to decide on the 15th when we're passing this budget is whether or not do we include the roof in this budget, and then once we go ahead and go downstairs and present it and then have further conversations regarding that, do we make adjustments to the budget based off of that, or are we at a point where we feel as though that we're comfortable enough that we can remove it on the 15th and then work jointly with the city to be able to go ahead and have that done over the next fiscal year?
Yes, ma'am. I'm happy to work as closely as I can to get you that information. My concern is the 15th is 2 weeks away, and I'm not sure whether they will have an answer by then, as they're just meeting with Mr. Giddens sometime this week. So, but I certainly will do my best to get a foundation or get a handling of what their plans are.
I appreciate that. And does anybody else have any questions based off of what I asked or something different?
I think, I mean, I'm sorry that, Madam Chair, from where I'm sitting at, I think it would be prudent to leave the $1.2 million for the roof, if nothing else, as a placeholder. I'm a firm believer that what's in front of you is what you're going to see. So if we go downstairs and we don't have the roof, in there, even though they are, at this point, they're just initial conversations. Bottom line is the roof needs to be replaced. So I don't know. From my initial reaction would be to leave it in the budget as is. That way we can actually start talking about the real money. I mean, even if we go with the House versus the Senate, we're still asking for essentially $2.5 to $3.25 million. I mean, that is going to have to be uh, uh, asked for from the city. So I'd say we just leave all the cards on the table.
No, you make a good point. I will say that from my conversations with, friends of the governing body, they are very aware of, obviously Mr. Neff is working closely with the city staff. It is in their CIP, the whole holistic CIP that exists. They're very aware of the situation with the roof, and it does exist in their CIP. So they're extremely aware. So it's not a surprise. It's a priority for all involved. My 2 cents.
Absolutely. And I think that, what Carlos had said makes sense because, the only thing that we're doing after we adopt our budget is presenting it. But we are supposed to, on the 4th of May, have a work session with the governing body to really be able to go through the budget. And at that point, we may have a better handle and understanding regarding the roof because it's one of those things. Once they are able to have an assessment on whatever roofing projects they may have, there may have been an RFP put out on the street, and we may have better direction because clearly it's one of those of, are we going to be having the roof replaced all at once? Or are we having it done in sections? And then what is the time frame for the section? So there's just a lot of further conversations that need to be had. But certainly I want to make, everybody who, aware of the fact that we are certainly wanting to have those conversations. And if we just leave it in there as an earmark, it's not, indication of our unwillingness to work with that, because I think that this with something of that price tag and knowing that their city needs regarding their roofing as well, we want to be able to work together to be able to come up with the best results for the city as a whole. But certainly, our roof does need to get done, and it's just figuring out what is the best, most cost-effective way in order to be able to do that.
And Madam Chair, if I may, based on what Calvin stated, I really felt like they were very receptive to working with us. So I think it's going to, probably require conversations between the governing body and the school board. I feel like kind of Calvin and myself are kind of taking things, from one entity to the next. And so I agree with you. I think those conversations need to occur between the two bodies. And, like I said, I was very receptive to it.
Absolutely. It's great to hear that because I think that one of us has the intentions of trying to work together to be able to fix all of the roofing needs in the city and doing it in a very cost-effective way, because as a taxpayer, I have an investment in the city's roofs, not just the school roofs, but obviously I'm an advocate for the school, in this position. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, seeing that there is no further discussion, I'm now going to go ahead and move on to the RFP for the MPCS compensation study. Mr. Warwick, again, please.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, and this will be my last item of the evening. We are requesting your motion to initiate an RFP for a compensation study that focuses on alternatives to the current midpoint methodology salary scale. If approved to proceed, we would begin preparing documents to seek proposals as soon as we can. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Does anybody have any questions regarding this RFP? Okay, seeing that there are no questions, do I have a motion regarding the RFP?
Move to move to allow the Finance Department in conjunction with the Executive Administration to proceed with issuing an RFP for a compensation study focusing on alternatives to the current midpoint methodology salary scale.
I
Second.
second.
All right, since this addresses finances, Ms. Williams, can you do a roll call, please?
Ms. Rachel Kirkland,
Yes.
Ms. Tricia Rhodes,
Yes.
Mr. Carlos Vargas,
Yes.
Ms. Debbie McIntyre.
Yes, hearing that there is no opposition, the motion to allow the Finance Department in conjunction with the Executive Administration to proceed with issuing an RFP for a compensation study focusing on alternatives to the current midpoint methodology salary scale hereby passes. Now going ahead and moving on to the RFP for Cougar Elementary School outside air unit replacement. Mr. Neff.
Madam Chair, members of the board, the superintendent is requesting approval to initiate a request for proposal, an RFP, for the replacement of the outdoor air units at Cougar Elementary School. The 3 outdoor air units at Cougar are the original units that were installed when the school opened in 2001. The original units operate with the R22 refrigerant, which is virtually unattainable or extremely costly if we do find it at this current time. The replacement of these units will be much more energy efficient and increase the outdoor airflow throughout the building. This project, while originally listed in the FY22 capital improvement plan, is we anticipate it being quite an expensive project. We think we can be creative with moving it into the FY21 with some of the savings we've had from the year. Therefore, the superintendent would like to move this project forward into this current fiscal year. So the superintendent is requesting your approval to move forward with this RFP.
Does anybody have any questions of Mr. Neff? Seeing that there are no questions, do I have a motion regarding the RFP for the Cougar units?
Move to allow the Finance Department in conjunction with the Executive Administration and the Maintenance Director to proceed with the issuing of an RFP for the replacement of 3 outside air units at Cougar Elementary School.
I second.
Seeing that this is a finance matter, Ms. Williams, can you please go ahead and do a roll call?
Ms. Rachel Kirkland,
Yes.
Ms. Tricia Rhodes,
Yes.
Mr. Carlos Vargas,
Yes.
Ms. Debbie McIntyre.
Yes, hearing that there is no opposition, the motion to allow the Finance Department in conjunction with the Executive Administration and the Maintenance Director to proceed with issuing an RFP for the replacement of 3 outside air units at Cougar Elementary School hereby passes. Now going ahead and moving on to upcoming meetings. We have a regular school board meeting to adopt the FY22 budget scheduled for Monday, March 15th, 2021 at 6:59 p.m. in the school board meeting room. Are there any board member comments this evening? All right, the only thing that I'd like to be able to say this evening is that, I certainly want to acknowledge the staff in the fact that, all of us, I think for the most part, were able to go ahead and receive the second vaccinations yesterday. Certainly that is something that was fantastic and a great opportunity that was available to all of us. And I certainly appreciate anybody that had to work today that had any type of reaction to the vaccination, because I know that, some people were significantly hit by it, and certainly appreciate that. And now that we're going to be moving on and commencing our first students coming back in the hybrid format this week since the fall, very excited for that to happen, and appreciate all the work and effort that has gone into everything from the professional development to the bell schedules, to the videos and notifications and newsletters, Facebook posts, everything that has been disseminated to the families to make them aware of all the changes that are upcoming in the division, and certainly appreciate all the staff that have returned to our buildings in order to be able to work with our students in an in-person format. Were there any other comments this evening? All right, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and call us into a short recess so that we can go ahead and go into a closed meeting on personnel.